Hello, on this video I'm going to talk about C++ inheritance, its access specifiers, which is private, public, and protected. And I'm also going to talk about the multi-level inheritance as well as multiple inheritance. For that, I'm going to create a new project on Visual Studio. I'm going to search for C++, click on Console App, and then Next. I'm going to give it a name. And here is my project. I'm going to do a little bit of a cleanup. I'm going to come here in the Solution Explorer, right-click on Source Files, and add a class. So for this video, I'm going to pretend I'm writing some software for a school system. In other words, some classes to work with students, classes to work with employee, faculty, professors. So the first class I'm going to create is going to be the professor class. Click OK. Every time I create a class, it's a habit of mine to create all the access specifiers here. And the last one, protected. Now you don't have to do that. If you don't have anything public nor protected, you do not have to do that. And the private, everything that doesn't have the word private by default becomes private. So everything here is optional as long as you're not using those. But I like to have those over there even if I'm not using it. All right, so professor is going to have a couple of things here. So first going to have the string name because, well, every professor has a name. And then the professor also, I'm going to put here string address. So every professor has a name and an address. And obviously there's a lot more other things that they can have here. So they might have also string subjects expertise. In other words, whatever they are expert on and then they teach, right? So that might be math or engineering, etc. And by the way, I'm creating everything here public, but it's a very bad habit to create everything public. You really should create these as private and then use encapsulation to access those. But for learning purpose, I'm going to create all those public just to be a little simpler and easier for me to code this for now. But again, this is a bad habit right here. Always use encapsulation. So the professor has these three variables. So I'm going to go to the main and then I'm going to include the professor header. And now I can create some objects right here. All right, so n name is going to be an good professor. And address is going to be a fancy place, and then an subject of expertise is going to be something like engineering. Now the professor class has been instantiated and the object's called n and everything is set on n. Now let's create another class. Let's pretend this class is for students. So I'm going to add a class here and that's going to be the student class. So the student class also has the private, public, protected. The student also has something very similar to professor. It has the name and the address. So I'm going to put the name and the address. But then the student now has a string called degree. Now I'm going to include the student. And now I can do something crazy similar that I did for professor to the student. So now student Jane equals new student, and then Jane name equals the address, party village, and then finally an degree is going to be biology. All right, so two completely different classes and with its own objects. However, if we take a look right here, you're gonna see that they have repeated variables on each class. So the professor class has name and address, and the student class also has name and address. They're two different distinct classes, but they have exactly the same code. So when two classes have exactly the same code, that is a great opportunity for inheritance. So currently we have something like this. So here's a class professor, and the class professor has something that belongs to professor only. And then we have the class student, and the class student has some variables that belong to student class only. But if you take a look, some of those items are the same, which in this case would be the name and the address. So if it's the same, we're doing repetitive things. So instead of doing repetitive codes, we can create a third class, and then let's call this class a person class. So we can create the person class, and instead of having these two items right here, we can move them right here. So in this case, we would have not these two items right here, and then we can inherit it. And to inherit it, it's a two dots, the items from this class right here. And the same thing here with the student class, we can inherit the items from this class. So we only have the professor class, we only have the student class. Now let's code the person class, and we're going to remove the items from the professor class and from the students and move those to the person class. All right, so I'm going to right click here in source files and then add a class, and I'm going to name this class the person class. So the person class also has the private, public, and protected. And the professor has the name and the address. And I'm going to move the name and the address to the person class. And I'm going to do the same for the students. So the student had name and address. So I'm going to delete this thing because now the name and address are on the person class. So we move those two variables from the students and from the professor class, and we place them on the person class. Now, if you go back to the main program, now we have a bunch of errors right here because guess what? The name cannot be found on the professor class, and the name can also be found in the student class. Now, to fix this, this is when we do the inheritance. And to do the inheritance, I'm going to first include the class here, the person class. And then after that, I can inherit, which is these two dots right here. I can inherit the person class. Now, if I just inherit like this, it's going to make the person class private. If it's private, that means only the professor class can see the items from the person class. I want the person class items to be visible for everybody, including the main program. So because of that, I'm going to put public right here. So this is how I inherit the person class. And I have to do the same thing on the student. So the student is going to inherit the person class the same way. Now, once the student and the professor class inherit the person class, That means any variable or any function that is on the person class, and also it has to be the public ones, okay? I'll come back and talk more about the private and protected in a little bit, but right now, just focus on the public. So any item that's public on the person class will be inherited by the professor class. And when you put public right here, that means all the items from person gets placed right here in the public area, which is accessible by your main program, by other classes. So because of that, the red squiggly went away. If I change this to non-public, then now I have the red squiggly right here because it's inaccessible. So when you inherit, you have to inherit as public. You don't have to, but for this purpose right here, you have to inherit as public. I'm just going to display some of this data right here. And I'm going to run this program just to make sure everything is working. And here I have the name and the area of expertise, and then the name of the students and the degree. All right, okay, good. All right, so currently I have one class here, which is the class professor. And then I have a second class called student. And then finally, I have a third class called person. And then I have two variables here. That's the name and the address. For the professor, I have one variable here, which is the area of expertise. And then finally, for the students, I have one item here, which is the degree. But when you inherit something here, you get whatever the person has gets placed right here inside the student. In other words, you inherit everything. And the same thing for the professor. The professor is inheriting everything from the person, so the items from the person gets included right here in the professor. So the client, in this case the main program, does not know the existence of the person class. So that's the beauty of inheritance. Now the next topic is the multi-level inheritance. So this class here can inherit items from this class. And this class here can inherit items from this class. But what if it creates another class? And let's call this class animal, because people are animals. So if we create a animal class, and then can this person class inherit the items from this animal class? And the answer is yes. So if we create items right here on the animal class, and if the person class inherits the animal, then these two items right here will be available right here for the person class. And if the student class inherits from the person, then these two items are here will also available here and available right here. And the same thing right here. So whatever inherits from person, we also inherit from animal. And that's called a multi-level inheritance, because these classes right here in the bottom are inherited from multi-classes. All right, so let's code the animal class now. So I'm going to right click on sources and add another class, and I'm going to name this animal class. So the animal class, I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to copy the access and let's say the animal eats some kind of food, whatever the food it is the animal eats. So now I'm going to go to the person class, and then on the person class, I'm going to inherit public animal. First, I need to add includes animal. All right, so now I can inherit from the animal class, So the person is going to inherit from the animal, and the student inherits from person. Remember, person also inherits from animal. So therefore, the student class will have everything from the person plus everything from the animal class. So if I go to my main program, the student has degree, and then Jane now inherits everything from the animal class. And if you look right here, I see food. So food is going to be apple. And we can do the same thing with professor. So here, N can also have foods, and then N food is going to be carrot. So without changing anything on the professor class nor on the student class, we do have the food available, even though the food is not from the person class, it is from the animal. And that's what's called multi-level inheritance. Now, all the examples that I'm giving here to you is only for variables, but that works for functions as well. If you create a function on one class and if you inherit everything from that class, that will be also available for you. All right, so the next item is going to be multiple inheritance. So currently we have the student class, then we have the professor class, then we have the person class, and then we have the animal class. And the way we inherit everything is the student inherits everything from person, the professor inherits everything from person, and the person inherits everything from the animal class. So that's the multi-level. Now, question now is, can the person or professor or student inherit for other class? So right now each class is inheriting only one class, but can we create another class and have the person class inheriting everything from this class? Doing so, you will be inherit from two classes. So you're going to be inherit from the animal class and from another class here. Let's call this class employee class. So in other words, one class inheriting from more than one class. So I'm going to right click here on source and add a class. I'm going to name this class employee and click OK. And then the employee is going to have, I'm going to copy here, float salary. So the employee has salary. Now the class person is only inheriting everything from animal, but I can put a comma right here and inherit everything from the employee because maybe the person is working. So I'm going to first include the employee, and then now I can public employee right here. So now one class, in this case the class person, is inheriting everything from the animal and from the employee. So one class inheriting two class at the same time, not in a multi-level, but just multiple inheritance at the same time. So because the person is inheriting everything from animal and employee, now if I go to the main program, I can access that variable, which is salary here in this case. So salary, $150,000. So right here, if I want to print Jane name and Jane salary, then it will be printing the $150,000. So I'm gonna run this program, and here I have the student name, the major, and the salary. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is something that we've been coding right here, but we have not covered that yet, which is the private, public, and protected. So let's spend some time on this. So everything you put in public becomes public all over. So if it's public, then any class that uses the professor class can see everything on the public. So on the main program, I'm gonna make it simple, and I'm gonna delete everything that's not a professor here, and I'm gonna concentrate on the professor class only, okay? So I'm gonna close this other classes right here, and I'm gonna concentrate on the professor class only. Professor class and on the person class. But let's look at the professor first. So the professor has a variable called subject expertise, and that's public. So if it's public right here, that means anybody can see it. Any class that instantiates this object, or any class that inherits this class, can have access to this variable. So, and that's the reason why we can set the subject expertise here. If we move this to the private, then only the professor class can see and have access to this variable. Nobody else. This is private. So just in case if I create some functions, then those functions in this class can have access to this variable. So in this case here, I'm going to create a void set subject. And then I'm going to create another one to get subjects. So now I create two functions to access this private variable. So I'm going to do hover over, show potential fix, create a definition. So now the void get set subjects. I'm going to put here subjects expertise equals whatever the string is passed as a parameter. So even though the subject expertise is private, because this function belongs to the same class, then it is accessible. Now I'll go back to the professor header. I'm going to hover over and then show potential fix and create a definition of get subject this time. And I'm going to have now this function returning the subject of expertise. So again, because this function belongs to the professor class, then it can access the subject expertise, which is a private variable in this class. So because it's private, we cannot access directly like that. You're gonna have an arrow. So it says here inaccessible. So the way we do that, instead of accessing the variable directly, you use the function that you created to do that kind of work. So use the function instead. And then if you want to print the subject of expertise, you just use and get subjects, and then you can print the subjects of expertise of this professor. So this here is called encapsulation. So you should always create variables and also use encapsulation. All right, so private means only this class can access it, nothing else. Public means everybody can access. Now let's take a look on protected. Protected can only be accessed by inheritance. So right now, the professor class is not being inherited by any class, but the person class is. So I'm going to go to the person class, And right here on the protected area of the person class, I'm going to create a variable called myProtected. So myProtected string will only be accessible to those classes that inherit the person class. So professor inherits the person class. So because professor inherits the person class, that the professor class will be able to see that protected variable. So on the professor.h, I have access to that protected. So I'm going to create another function right here called void display protected. So the professor class, because it is inherit everything from the person class, then it can have access to the protected variables. So right here on the professor, if I want to display the myProtected string, then I can, because it is a protected variable. So now I can come here and call the function that displays the protected value, and then it will display because it has access. So right now it prints engineering and prints nothing because it has nothing. Display protected. Protected has nothing. Okay, so it's gonna have something now. All right, so I set the value for something, and let's run again the program. And then I have something. Now, that looks like the same thing we did all over, right? But it's not, because here I'm displaying the value by accessing a public function that's on the professor class. But if I try to access that value directly, I can't, because that's protected. So if I try to access the myProtected string, it will not let me access. So if I force myProtected string, then it gives me a red squiggly. It will not let me do anything. So let me draw here. So now we have something like the professor class, and the professor in class inherits everything from the person class, and the person class has a protected item right here, and this protected item is available for the professor class because it inherits. So this protected item goes right there into the professor. However, our main program, the main program, does not have access to the protected. So the protected items stop right here on the professor. Now the professor can create a public function to display the protected items from the person. However, the protected items will not be directly available to the main. It will not. So the public items right here on this class, the public items will be available to the protected, and we will carry over all the way to the main. But the protected ones will not. It stops right here on this class. Protected is available only for the class that inherits that class. It will not be available for the class that instantiates the professor class. In other words, the main here instantiates the professor. The main has access, our main program has access to the public ones, but it does not have access to the protected. Public is for everybody. Protected is only for the class that inherits that class. And then the final item is the privates, and the private is available for here and nobody else. The private doesn't go anywhere. The private stays right here on this class and this class only. It doesn't happen, it doesn't go anywhere. So the most restricted one will be the privates. The second most restrictive one will be protected, and the one that has the least amount of restriction will be your public. Alright, so that's all for this video. Thanks for watching.